So this is part 2 of our 3-part series, Courageous Conversations About Race. I am Kimberly Waller. I am the founder and CEO of Women's Power League of Alaska. We are a 501c3 and a network of professionals united for the purpose of strengthening our state's economy through the empowerment of women. And we do that through mentorship, professional development, and community building. And this conversation falls into the category of community building, right? Because we recognize that our communities are strong when they are equitable and inclusive. So for those of you who want more information about our organization, if you'd like to join our mailing list, though I suspect a lot of you already are on our mailing list, if you would like to donate, if you like what you see here today, head to WPLAK.com. I want to start by thanking our sponsors, the Alaska Humanities Forum, the 4-Acre Group, YWCA Alaska, and GCI. Thank you. I am seeing the chat bars already going there. I wanted to jump right into it today, but first let's talk rules. I don't doubt that any of you ladies will break the rules today, even though we secretly like rule breakers, but we do have a couple of ground rules today. Don't forget to speak your mind, but of course, be courteous and kind. So many of the discussions and the events that we sponsor at Women's Power League are attached to sensitive issues. So we want to start by reminding everyone to mute your microphone outside of our speakers who will be chiming in. And I wanted to add that as an organization, you know, we are all about women and we're not about divisiveness. We believe that as a gender, we're weakened when we don't support one another. So today you will hear from community leaders, mothers, and activists. We want to make sure that all are respected and speaking their truth. And so I just wanted to start off by saying that as we continue to let people into the room here. Okay. And I'm going to, hello. I'm going to start with a big announcement, and I am hoping that Megan of the Alaska Humanities Forum is on the line. Hi, Megan. So here we go. So one of our sponsors, as I mentioned, the Alaska Humanities Forum, is supporting, you know, they're actually sponsoring 3 2.5-month-long cohort journeys. And so Megan is here to share more about conversations across generations. And I'll be plugging this throughout our conversation today. This is for those of you who want to delve a little deeper into your conversations about race. And it is really an incredible opportunity, and it is free. And we really like free. So Megan, if you want to go ahead and take over and share the details.
Sure. So if you're not familiar with the Alaska Humanities Forum, we are the State Humanities Council for Alaska, and we connect Alaskans through stories, ideas, and experiences that empower people and strengthen communities. And so as Kim was describing, we have another GCI sponsored program that we're going to be running, and it's called Conversations Across Generations. And the idea behind it is that while we may talk about race, we may talk about race across generations within our own families, who often share our racial identities, other opportunities to really have deep multi-generational discussions about race are limited. And so Conversations About Generations is a program that will support, as Kim mentioned, 10-week-long, so 2.5-month, 10-week-long cohort journeys, consisting of transformative intergenerational conversations about racial identity and experiences of racism in Alaska. And those conversations are going to be guided by the question, what does racial equity demand of us? The cohorts will be 16 people each, and they will be from a range of generations, racial and cultural identities, gender identities, and neighborhoods in the Greater Anchorage Bowl. And so we're in the process of planning and scheduling. And if you are interested in being involved or getting updates as the program gets scheduled and everything, please email me. Kim just put my email address in the chat bar. It's mcassiola@akhf.org. And again, it's in the chat bar. It's better to copy and paste than for me to spell it out. So yeah, that was that's the big thing that is really going deeper. Another thing that is going on right now is that GCI has sponsored several series of our radio program that is in partnership with Out North Radio. It is the radio series is called The Togethering, and they're conversations around big themes. And so we had our first one this today at noon around lunchtime, and we'll have two more on 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock tomorrow and Wednesday. And those conversations, they're just like the conversations across generations. We're going to have intergenerational conversation tomorrow. And then the Wednesday conversation is about our pathway forward. And so if you're interested in that, there's information on our website. I'll plug in some links to the Facebook events in the chat bar. And that work is also in partnership with the YWCA of Alaska.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Megan. And thanks again to the Alaska Humanities Forum. For any of you who are looking to delve a little deeper, I really like the idea of having conversations about race with people who are not only of different races and ethnicities and nationalities, but I think that the component of age is pretty important. And so I like that you have included that there. And I want to thank the Alaska Humanities Forum for for really committing with that cohort and offering that for free. I think that is just so incredible. So thank you. And Megan's email, again, if you're interested, is right there in the chat bar. And I want to say also congratulations on Togethering, which aired on 106.1 FM today on Out North Radio. So congratulations on that. So our initial courageous conversations about race came right on the heels of the death of George Floyd. And for many, myself included, it was a highly charged conversation. Thank you for those of you who came back for part two. Thank you for those of you who are joining us for the first time, because these aren't easy conversations to have in a public or private space. So we just want to acknowledge that. So today we're continuing with that talk and looking at race from a local lens, specifically in the state of Alaska. So like last time, I like to put it on the table. We will not get to it all, but we'll hopefully provide some food for thought and give you resources for those who need that. I mentioned the chat bar. You can also utilize the raise hand function if you have something to share. So our plan is to address how institutional racism has impacted our state and what is our part in helping to end it. Our goal is to move forward from anger to action and learn about how issues of race have been addressed in education and policy, and what are the best ways to lend our support to these efforts. We're also going to talk about what Alaska residents can do to help assure that coronavirus federal funds are distributed in equitable ways. So for part three of this conversation, which will take place in September, we're going to move from the local lens to a national lens. So just so you have the heads up on how these conversations are progressing. So I've been encouraged by many of the talks and side conversations that I've had the pleasure to sit in on recent months, most notable those led by the Alaska Black Caucus. Big shout out to the Alaska Black Caucus. Also the Rasmussen Foundation. I've been having conversations in my own workplace at the 4-Acre Group about race and more. So we're going to kind of reverse the order of things, I thought, tonight, because what we would like to do is hear from you. And so I wanted to start with a question, and that question is, okay, for those who have been broaching topics about race or making anti-racist declarations in recent weeks, and just post your response in the chat bar, how do you feel that they have been received? Do you feel that they have been received positively or negatively? So take your time in doing that. You can post any additional comments that you would like to in the chat bar. And actually, while you're posting those, I wanted to reach out and invite Mary Fulp. She's Women's Power League of Alaska's committee chair. Mary, I wanted you to chime in here because you've taken a bold stance on all types of issues on social media around race and on a lot of things. You've done that in the past. So I wanted to ask you what the reception has been like for you in some of these conversations that you've been having.
Thank you. They're difficult conversations, and social media has been a challenge for me to be true to the best version of me as I communicate anti-racist, just ideas and thoughts and actions. I have a social media presence that includes people that I grew up with in Kodiak, Alaska, and includes people I don't know very well. It includes all political sides of everything. And so anytime, what I've been blown away with is that as we take action for change, there is so much resistance, and it's really bringing out the best in people and the worst in people. And so I've blocked some people from my social media sites because it's gotten downright just the comments are don't when they breach that line of being dignified and respectful in their responses. Part of me is really like, how can I keep these people in my audience so that their minds might change? But then also, how do I set boundaries that are clear, that if you want to communicate with me and stay in this space, then it needs to be respectful dialogue, regardless of how we feel. And that's been a really significant challenge for me as I take bold steps for anti-racism.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a tough line to walk. And as you and I were talking about this conversation, we talking about this, we kind of broached another conversation: to block or not to block, right? To delete or not to delete. Because I'll tell you the truth, I haven't been having the same experiences of you, Mary, but as what I said to you is I attest that to me being a Black woman, right? So maybe because of, you know, because people may perceive those sensitivities and they don't share that with me in the way that they're sharing it with you, because I have seen some of the threads on Mary's posts, and I'm like, oh no, I'm done. I need to log off now and go take a walk around the block. I mean, it is intense. And so I was curious to see, you know, how others felt, or, you know, what others have been receiving. So thank you for sharing that, those of you that have shared in the chat bar. And so I guess now, you know, asking the question, what do we do about that, right? Do we keep the conversation going? Are we at a point, do you feel like as a community that we just block these people? Do we silo ourselves out? Because we were saying that, you know, when you do that, you run the risk of closing out communications with people who may need to hear it and who may need to engage with people like you. At the same time, right, acknowledging that we don't need to deal with those who are speaking from a place of hate, right? But like, what is the, how do you see the line that we walk with that, especially when for some people, I'm being told it's family members?
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any additional comments on that or anything they'd like to say? You can unmute yourself or you can press the raise hand function.
I'd like to say something, if you know. I think that in this season, we're facing a lot of hard times, right? There's the official pandemic of COVID-19 that has highlighted a lot of inequities that make many of us upset by virtue of us even being on this call, right? The murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many named and unnamed others has sparked it's now, well, racism existed for a long time, right? But it's in the forefront now with social media, right? So that's one of the unofficial pandemics. And I honestly, even as a Black woman, am learning grace in this season. Grace because everybody's on a journey, right? And I can no longer like block and delete people on social media, because then I don't get to witness the beauty in the journey as well, right? There were people that, you know, would espouse such hate and then realize like, wait a minute, but I love my friend who's of a different hue. Wait a minute, I might need to rethink something after I watched the 8 minutes, 46 seconds where George Floyd was being murdered. And so I think that we have to extend grace, knowledge in this season, because it's a journey for all of us. And some people are more vocal about their views and some people are not, right? And so I'm just learning that grace.
Thank you so much, Sonia. That is great feedback, and I agree. Grace is a really important word to remember in times like these. So thank you, and I'm seeing some conversation there in the chat bar as well. So as we learned on the last call, and you know, you were talking about communities right there. You know, Sonia, we wanted to talk about how we best show up for our communities when issues of inequity present themselves. We know that having these conversations, right, with our friends and with our colleagues and with our family, that's an important part of it. We know that holding our elected leaders accountable and hearing where they stand on race certainly matters. That is a big part of it. Early voting started today, and let me see. Tomorrow's the state primary election. Of course, we know we need to show up to our local elections. In addition, we have a national election November 3rd. Equally as important is making our voice heard via the census. And I'm backing into this next guest because she was originally scheduled towards the close of the conversation, but the deadline for the census has changed. And as the night goes on, I know that many of us, we have to log off because we have lives and children and all types of and families and all types of obligations. But I moved Lori Wolf of the 4-Acre Group to the top of the conversation to talk more about the census and why it is such a big deal for our state. So Lori Wolf is the president and CEO of the 4-Acre Group. So Lori, I would ask you to turn your mic on and take it away.
Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you all. Shout out to lots of other census champions on this call. Sonia among the champions on the call here. So I won't be the only person to speak on this topic, I'm sure, but I'll start us off. So I have a lot of hats on today. So I am the CEO of the 4-Acre Group, but I'm also the founder of something called the Alaska Census Working Group, which is a nonpartisan multi-sector statewide effort. We've been around for about 5 years with the realization that Alaska really had no institutional knowledge at all about how to operate a census, and there was essentially a massive leadership void. And so 4-Acre stepped in along with our partners at Cook Inlet Housing. I'm also a member of the Anchorage Complete Count Commission, in which Sonia is the chair of that group. And I am just a bona fide census nerd. So I promised Kim that I would stick to my 5 minutes, and I've got a little thing written down just to make sure that I stick to my time, but she's also, I've given her full ability to just stop me because I can really nerd out on this stuff and I don't really want to do that with all of you tonight. So I just will suffice to say that Alaska has a ton at stake. I like to say we have 3.2 billion reasons why we should care about the census, because that's how much money Alaska gets as from the federal government every year. And it is about dollars. The census determines critical services for our state and our community, everything from police and fire to roads and airports and housing and healthcare. Every community, every Alaskan benefits from the dollars that come into our state each year based on census data. It's also about not just dollars, but it also is about the data itself. I like to think of the census data like toothpaste. We all have it. We all use it, but we rarely consider how it's made or where it comes from. And the census is like that. It's everywhere. We use it. We use that data all the time in our organizations and in our daily lives. So We use it to plan for the future, to make decisions about where and when to invest in our communities, whether that's local government planning for emergency response or businesses deciding where to open a store or how to close a store. We all rely on census data every single day. And importantly, not just data and dollars, but also democracy. So in terms of democracy, census data determines state and local political boundaries through redistricting process. And you're probably all watching the news because we've just appointed our redistricting board for Alaska. The Census Bureau data also reinforces the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And without accurate census data, these laws cannot be accurately enforced. For all these reasons, census data is critical, and the risk of not having accurate data could mean a reduction in federal funds for our state and local governments, an inability to plan for the future for our local communities, improper enforcement of the Voting and Civil Rights Act laws, and the possibility of the reduction of essential services. There is just so much at stake. I just can't overestimate that. I think that's on one hand, but why are we having this conversation tonight? Let me just put a finer point on that. So it's really important to recognize that census is rooted in a deeply unjust system, and it is deeply, deeply flawed. The National NAACP describes it in this way. Undercounting of the Black population was first required by law. The Three-Fifths Compromise of the Constitutional Convention of 1787 counted enslaved Black people as 3/5 of a person in apportioning congressional districts for the U.S. House of Representatives. Since then, the census has severely undercounted the Black populations to great disadvantage in representation, resources, and power. So the Three-Fifths Compromise is a chilling reminder that the system that we use today to count every American was originally designed to devalue Black, Alaska Native, American Indian, and other communities of color. To put it in another way, the census was designed to count white male landowners. Simply put, we just never started over with a new, just, and equitable system to count people in this country. And so we still used a very flawed system and we just try to count more people with a really bad system. We do recognize that the census is part of that flawed system. And so I believe that it's our job every day to say that out loud, to see it for what it is, and to do what we can to not just push change of the whole system, but also to push how we use the tool itself, because it is the tool that we have at our disposal at the moment. So you can now see this unjust system at play in many ways today. It still focuses on counting people with home addresses. It's now exacerbated with the push to an online system. It is not translated into many languages, including our Alaska Native languages, which is why at the Alaska Census Working Group, we have emphasized that. And so much more. Now, there's so many ways that it's exacerbated. And that understanding really helps us identify the steps that we can take to improve it. So I just want to acknowledge it's a bad system, but we have to use it. The problem is now that Alaska, we are 50% counted right now in our state. We are behind all 50 states, Guam and Puerto Rico in our count. That is deeply, deeply troubling for our state. That's going to be exacerbated now by the issues with the Postal Service, and exacerbated by the current president, who has decided to move up the deadline. So we have to take action, and we have to take action now. I am reminded that after the killing of George Floyd, the rapper Killer Mike used his podium to really push two things. He said, you need to vote and you need to fill out your census. And he said, you need to let them know who you are and where you are. And so to that end, I have 5 things that I'd love for you all to do, and I'm gonna put them in the chat bar, because we need you all to take action today. The census is under huge threat. I am happy to say that our congressional delegation, they totally get it, and they are leading the charge on a bipartisan effort to get the census funded in the next round of CARES funding, and to move the deadline back to October. But right now they have pushed the deadline up a whole month into September. So take any one of these 5 steps. All of them are good. Please do number 5 first, which is to fill out your own census. If you haven't filled out your own census, it's really hard to be a census champion. So do that part first and then work your way back up. But I do think the congressional delegation really just needs to hear from you that you have their back as they fight really hard for Alaska. So I'm happy to answer questions about any of these 5 things, but I already went a minute over, so I'm going to stop.
No, Lori, you're great.
Take questions, but Kim showed our Alaska Counts campaign is our statewide effort. You're all welcome to join if you haven't joined already. There's tons of resources on there. There's tons of translated materials. I am super psyched to say that the municipality of Anchorage is using some of its CARES money to recognize the undercount in Anchorage. And we have also gotten other local governments to designate some of their CARES money to census count and in their communities. So there's lots of action still in the next month and a half, and I just really encourage all of you to get involved. And I'm happy to take any question you got afterwards, or you can become a census nerd too. I'd love that.
Thank you so much, Lori. If anyone has any questions for Lori, you are welcome to either raise your hand or post those in the chat bar. Lori, a quick question before we move to our next guest with the Anchorage Community Land Trust. Lori, what do you say to those who may mistrust the purpose of data, of the data that's collected in the census? What do you say to them? I feel like the majority of people on this call, we know we need to fill out our census, right? Or we have already filled out our census, but how do we communicate with those who don't feel the same?
It is such a real fear. I'd say the fear is stronger than it ever was. And even today, there's these now, if you've ever really just want to get a deluge in your inbox, there's all these census folks who talk every day. And the latest thing today is that the census itself is now sending out emails to people, which is really actually going to make it even more scary for people, because we've been telling people that the census will not contact you by email. So now people are even more afraid. So, in this moment where we're trying to build trust with people, I'd say there's legitimate concern, right? I'm not here to tell you that there's no fear to be had. There is real fear to be had. I can tell you that it is a punishable offense of 5 years in jail and a $250,000 fine for any census worker that divulges any information from the count. It's why, as volunteers, why we can't do the count ourselves, because we're not sworn to that same oath. So all we can do is promote the census, but I'm not a census worker. I'm not an enumerator, but I can tell you they take that oath. I get it though. There's so much fear, and I can't really dissuade you from having that fear. I think it's real. I think to that end though, right? I think we have to just lead and do and create the democracy that we really all want to live in, and living by fear is not the place where we should all be living. So I think the fear is real. I think this could be super harmful to a lot of Americans, and we also have to just be bold and do the thing that we need to do. So I can't convince you to tell you not to be afraid. I don't know, Sonia, if you have other things to say about that, but I'm in no position to tell you not to be afraid. Well, I'm in a position to tell you to do it anyway.
Yeah, we definitely have to be courageous. And I have one question here before we move on to our next guest. This is from Marianne. She asks, do the census interviews have to take place in person? For rural villages, could the census group work with schools in scheduling people to go into the school on weekends to complete online census forms?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So most of the count in rural Alaska has mostly been completed by the in-person. They suspended in-person count in rural Alaska when COVID struck. So now we are in a space called what's called non-response follow-up. Where the census workers are supposed to be coming door to door. That obviously for many parts of rural Alaska is a huge health hazard. As part of the pandemic, that will not be happening. And so there are census champions in every community, and they should be, if not, trying to promote the count in the community as well. We have tried working with the school districts, and we are certainly working through the tribes, and AFN is also trying to work with its with people on the ground already. So we're not trying, so this, because the Census Bureau is not going to have people fly into communities. That's just, it's too, that's part of the, that's the way we spread a pandemic. So that's not happening. But for all these reasons, again, I think, you know, again, we recognize, and there's been a huge, I'll say one of the best things that happened in schools was Molly of Denali programming, really had a whole set of programming around the census, and it had a huge impact on schools, and that, you know, that ran quite a while ago. So anyway, there's lots of tools if you're trying to convince kids to be part of the count. I will say kids under the age of 5, super, super, super hard to count. So anything you can do to remember all those little ones in your life.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lori Wolf. So we know that we can make our communities more equitable, excuse me, by filling out those census. I'm sure everyone on the call has filled theirs out. We've heard that the deadline has been moved up 1 month. Okay, so as an action item, we can all be census champions. So please spread the word around. As a state, we got to get this right. We are at the bottom. We know that it matters. 10 minutes, 10 years of impact. Thank you, Lori, for all of your work in this area. I want to move it along. You can post your questions in the chat bar if you like. And don't forget, throughout this conversation, if you want to speak, you can go ahead and raise your hand there. I'm seeing so many of you that I know and have collaborated with. So many of my friends on this call. I want to take time to thank all of you for tuning in today. We want to move it down to bring a little context into what we were talking about in the communities. Our next guest, we have Lindia Kelleher. She's the Set Up Shop Lending Manager. And Radhika Krishna, and Director of Programs with the Anchorage Community Land Trust. So I know many of you on the call are familiar with this awesome organization, ACLT. Many have partnered with them on initiatives in the past. I think what I really appreciate about ACLT has been their willingness to have tough conversations about how race has impacted our state and disenfranchised specific communities. So in our last conversation, we talked a little bit about redlining and zoning. And we thought that some of that foundational information about our city and more of our state was important to have in this space to bring more context into how systemic racism impacts housing. So Lindia and Radhika, if you are ready, please turn on your mics and you can take it away.
All right, hi everyone. This is Lindy Kelleher. Thanks, Kim, for having us. We're super excited. Like Kim mentioned, we work for the Anchorage Community Land Trust. We're a place-based nonprofit working in the Anchorage Bowl, and we primarily work in neighborhoods like Fairview, Mountain View, Spenard, ones that are often associated with disinvestment and, you know, a lack of opportunity, which is completely wrong. But, you know, unfortunately, those stereotypes do persist. And so we do work to combat that every day. And so today, Radhika and I are just going to talk about kind of where some of those perceptions came from and what the history of those neighborhoods is and how they are still shaping, you know, what's going on in today's society and how those neighborhoods are viewed and how those perceptions are still, you know, being passed on generationally. And you know how that makes our work relevant as a land trust working to reinvest in that community and in the residents there specifically so that they have the, you know, the same opportunities and aren't plagued by a reputation of, you know, just all of the, you know, things that people say, like avoid the views and, you know, you don't want to hang out in Spenard, things like that. And so Radhika will kind of talk about how the histories of these neighborhoods play into our work of neighborhood revitalization and economic and community development and our neighborhood entrepreneurship program and how, you know, those histories and the foundings of those neighborhoods really make our work necessary, and which is a bit of an unfortunate thing, but, you know, we're happy that we can be in spaces like this where conversations are happening. And so with that, I'm just gonna pass it over to Radhika really quickly.
Thanks, Lindy. Yeah, I think with our couple of minutes, I know it's so little time, but what I'm gonna try and do today is just give you a couple of facts, a couple of historical pieces of context that hopefully sort of blow your mind as much as they have for me. When I learn stuff like this, it makes my work come together because I can see where we've been and where we're going. So I just want to use these couple of minutes to talk about two neighborhoods that we think about as being really intertwined in the Anchorage context, and that's Mountain View and Fairview, right? You hear them together all the time, the views, not always in a good way. And they have really different histories. So I'll start with Mountain View. Mountain View was a middle-class single-family suburb in the 40s and 50s. It was a homesteading community, and it was a largely white neighborhood. And it was actually, I've heard from people who've moved up here during the oil boom times and before who were priced out of Mountain View, believe it or not. Mountain View was actually the site of Anchorage's first department store, first escalator in the city, which was a big deal. And it was widely known as sort of a nice area. And so Mountain View became the neighborhood that we know today, largely due to an increased density. When the oil boom hit, there was a huge housing crisis in Anchorage in the 60s and 70s. And so if you go around our inner ring neighborhoods, our Mountain Views, our Fairviews and Spenards, you can see all of those bread box 8-plexes and 6-plexes that were all thrown up largely in the same 10 years. And that sort of housing stock still shapes our city today. And so that sort of increase in density is really what has shaped our sort of first ring suburbs in Anchorage today. And largely, I think, has been sort of the socioeconomic push to where Mountain View is today, where yes, it's a neighborhood that has higher poverty, but it's also a neighborhood where people move from around the city, the state, and the world to get their start in Anchorage. Fairview is a really different story. And so Fairview was actually, to connect it back to your conversation last month, was Anchorage's original African-American neighborhood. It was called the East Chester Flats down by Chester Creek. And it was redlined. You can still see evidence of those racial housing covenants in the neighborhood. And the other really important piece of historical context that has shaped Fairview is that, like many, many other cities around the country, Anchorage, in Anchorage, you see evidence of a large highway that has gone right through what used to be a Black commercial corridor, where there were a lot of Black-owned businesses, where there was real investment, where there was a sense of community. And so this is another thing I think that has been an important piece of information if you're doing work in those neighborhoods, if you live there, is that you can still see how that highway has split that neighborhood right in half, and how we still have highway projects on the books today that continue that. So I know we've already gone over our time. I think that what I would leave you with is just a couple of points. One is, you know, language matters, and I hope that the next time you hear someone refer, and I won't repeat the words, to Fairview, or especially that Carr's Safeway store in Fairview, using a couple of racialized terms, that you'll think about that and you'll have a conversation with them, because these pieces of our community history all fit together. And I see that Lindy also put the Histories of Anchorage column that's in the ADN now in the chat bar. That's a great resource. Please go check that out. We've worked with David on some National Historic Site Registry work in Fairview, and I really love his column right now. So I'm going to leave that there. I hope those couple of facts were really informative.
Yes, they were. Thank you so much. Informative and hard to hear. And I want to thank the ACLT for your consistent work in this area. Really quickly, if you could share with those on the call who may be unfamiliar with ACLT, can you just quickly share a little bit about your work in helping to invest in the communities that you mentioned and how we can support you in that work?
Well, thank you. Yeah, so ACLT is a nonprofit. We work in the neighborhoods of Mountain View, Fairview, and Spenard, and we, oh, thank you. I'm seeing so many lovely messages in the chat bar. And we do work primarily around the commercial corridor and working with small businesses. And we do that work because we believe that neighborhoods, we grow a strong city and strong neighborhood economies when our neighbors, our business owners, our community leaders. So our Set Up Shop program provides training, lending, real estate help, and technical assistance to small business owners from our communities. And we also run Grow North Farm, which is a large urban farm right in the heart of Mountain View. So we believe in place-based investment because we know that if we spread out our work across the city, you wouldn't notice it. But when we spend 15 years doing work in a couple of blocks, that at the end of those 15 years, you'll be able to drive up and down there or walk up and down there and see the impact, and hopefully see your friends and neighbors speaking up, standing out, and being leaders in their own right. So we'll hope that normally I would offer to take you all on a tour of our neighborhoods. So as soon as we're allowed to be in cars together, please call me. We would love for you to come out and check out our urban farm space, Gurnworth Farm in Mountain View, and to check out our website. And if any of you have skill sets, and I know that all of you do, we're always looking for partners and help to work with small businesses and help people we know open the business of their dreams right in their home communities.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Radhika, and thank you, Lindy, for coming on today. Our next guest is Tiffany Hall, and I know that she is a new mom and has a little one that she could possibly be putting down as we speak. So Tiffany, if I'm just going to look at your block there and see if your face pops up, and if not, then I am going to move down to Sonia Hunt if I don't see you. Tiffany, are you there? Oh,
Joke's on me. She's not.
I
No.
I see a little one. Well, do you want me to come back to you, or you want me to intro you now? Okay, I will intro you now, and we'll keep it short.
Perfect.
Because
Thank
we
you
have,
so much.
yeah, we have, I feel like I was there just yesterday. We have little Bunny. Look at that face. All right, so when we talk about investment in community, some of you are aware of the alcohol tax that was passed, and that decisions on funding for distribution are being made around that tax. So there have been many partners in this work, and here today to talk more about that is Tiffany Hall, the Executive Director of Recover Alaska. So Tiffany, go ahead.
Thanks very much. I appreciate being invited here, and so thanks very much for hosting these conversations. And also just want to acknowledge that I am leading this work, but I'm not leading this work alone. This work that we've been doing has been in conjunction with the Alaska Children's Trust, the Homelessness Leadership Council, Agnew Beck Consulting, and the Alaska Black Caucus. And we continue to get more people sign on every day, but that's who we've been working with on this. So Recover Alaska is an organization that works to reduce excessive alcohol use and harms across the state. And we have been thinking about race since our inception because of the negative stereotypes around Alaska Native people and alcohol misuse. And that's sort of where our work on that ended until more recently. And over the past year, we have been trying to make sure that we diversify our leadership and our boards to look more like who we are trying to serve, which are all Alaskans, and trying to think about our own grant making and how we can bring equity into that. And so then as we started work on this alcohol tax revenue, we and those partners I mentioned all wanted to bring equity to the forefront. So as you may know, an alcohol tax passed for Anchorage in April of this year. Hooray. It's going to save lives regardless of the revenue. And it's estimated to bring in between $11 to $14 million annually. That's pre-COVID, but we know that people are still drinking, and so we still expect a significant amount of funding even in the first year, which will be next year in 2021. The three areas that it needs to go to are public safety, prevention of child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, and the third bucket is increased substance use disorder treatment and homelessness services. And so we got together and we invited everyone who had worked with us on the alcohol tax campaign, because we knew that the Assembly wanted to hear from subject matter experts. And we knew that through their own processes, they probably wouldn't be able to bring together as many people as we could, because they have a lot of other things they're also working on. And because not everybody is super comfortable going to Assembly meetings, and because there's not a lot of choice for dialogue there. So we invited almost 100 people to our first meeting, and we asked them to please invite people who they knew. And we also wanted to make sure we were inviting people with lived experience, as well as people who are doing equity work, because we know that there are race-based disparities in every single one of those 3 categories I mentioned where the funding goes to, as well as pretty much every public health issue that exists. And so it quickly grew to an invitation list of 250 people. And a lot of these people were actually showing up or sending us emails. And so we have presented our thoughts on where the tax revenue should go to the assembly and in a couple of town halls. And we make some recommendations in terms of those 3 buckets, but we also, what sets our framework apart from other examples that we've heard so far is that we are also saying that there should be some funding specifically dedicated to dismantling systemic racism. And we also say that they should change how they give the money out. I'll get to that second part in a moment, but in terms of dismantling systemic racism, because of these inequities and that our systems are built to disadvantage some people over others, we know that we won't see any progress in any of those 3 primary categories unless we also focus on dismantling systemic racism and addressing white supremacy, really. And so we recommend that they make sure that they include Black, Indigenous, people of color in the conversations moving forward. We recommend that they put money maybe to the Office of Equity that they're trying to create right now, maybe to conversations like YWCA hosts about social justice. We didn't specify exactly where because we are just a handful of people and our group of 250 voices didn't say this one program, not the others. So we gave them a list of every program that we heard of. But we really believe that part of the funding needs to go to that. And then in terms of the way they give the money away, we also know that a lot of philanthropy right now goes to organizations who have gotten money for a long time and who have funds to have grant writers and or who, you know, align with our current systems, which are broken. And so we are also saying that they should give the money away either through RFPs, through an outside entity, or if it has to go through the municipality, like through the health department, then to set up some protocols and to build equity into that funding system by saying, you know, by asking the questions, do you have Black, Indigenous, people of color, people with lived experience in leadership or on your board? And how are you ensuring that you're meeting the needs of the people most in need rather than just you are the best at filling out grant paperwork? That was a pretty scattered overview, but I tried to cover as much as I could in a short period of time. I'm happy to answer questions, or if there's something, Kim, that you feel like I left out, I'd be happy to speak to that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you did a wonderful job. You and baby Marguerite there did a wonderful job of giving us an overview. As we said at the top of this conversation, look, we got an hour and a half, right? So we want to give the basic information and we also want to provide resources. Our purpose for this conversation, as we also mentioned, is to talk about those structures and talk about our role in ending systemic racism for good. And so really quickly, someone asked what group you're with. Tiffany is with Recover Alaska. Quickly, Tiffany, can you just let us know what we can do? Those of us who are interested in supporting your initiatives, what can we do to do that? What do you need from us?
Thank you. So right now the process is with the Assembly. They're going to be having a work session on August 28th, and then eventually it will go to the approval of the entire budget. But if people would like to reach out to their Assembly members and let them know that you think they need to be addressing systemic racism, that would be a great help. Also, if you go to recoveralaska.org, there is a button on our homepage with all of our information about the alcohol tax, and within there you can click on like take action, and you can sign up for email alerts, but also it has the email addresses of your assembly members and how to find who your assembly member is, and some talking points and my contact information so that I can help fill in the other gaps. But at this point, it's really reaching out to your assembly people and telling your friends too also.
Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge that I know that we are getting very dense information, right? And it's a lot to process. Maybe it's just me, but as I'm hearing what is behind the work of a lot of our guests, you know, I hope that you all are as moved as I am, and I hope that it is helping to shed some light on how you know, systemic racism can really break down communities, and we have seen examples of that right here in our state. There are people who don't believe that that exists in our state, right? So that's what we're talking about right now. So, Tiffany, I appreciate you on our initial courageous conversation about race. Dialogue, education came up in a big way. The way Black history and the history of Black and Brown people is taught in our schools is of local and national concern, and another institution where racism thrives is in education. So up next, we are super fortunate to have Sonia Hunt. And Sonia is a senior director in the Office of Equity and Compliance with the Anchorage School District. So Sonia is here to share more about what ASD is doing regarding equity and anti-racism work. She'll also share a few of the things happening statewide for larger context. So Sonia, if you are ready, please turn on your mic, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Kimberly, for pulling all of these amazing women together to be able to expand the dialogue. So I want to first start out by saying that I think that equity is a deeply personal journey, as I've shared before. It's also a deeply studied experience, and it is also an adaptive challenge. So an adaptive challenge is something large. It is deeply embedded in institutions, in mental models, or what we call mindsets. It's deeply embedded in the way we conduct commerce, right? It's deeply embedded in the fabric of who we are in many Western societies, right? And so education is one part of that, right? So I want to start by just sharing that Ibram Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Stamped from the Beginning, like to give visuals, talks a lot about being anti-racist is also doing the policy work, right? And so just as a matter of recommendations before I go into what we in the Anchorage School District, how we're addressing this issue, is to always, of course, and I'm sure many of you know this, so I may be preaching to the choir, is to always visit the Alaska State Legislature pre-file list. Before I move, and I've moved to a couple of cities in the US, I always look at the pre-filing list because I want to know what's on the minds of people, right? When they introduce bills, right? And those are the policies that govern us, right? Those are the things that fund us. The next thing I do keep up with, and it's the Alaska Legislator Digest, right? Where I can receive updates on what's happening, right? You know, they always say, follow the money trail. Well, follow the legislation and follow the money, right? To be able to make sure that you're aware with what's going on. The second block that I want to really talk about is kind of what is going on with the Anchorage School District. So I have the awesome opportunity as serving as a part of a larger team in convening equity. And so I want to say that we have 3 buckets. So community engagement, staff and hiring, and academic achievement that we're working on in terms of equity and anti-racism. What we have just come through as a result of the murder of George Floyd is that we responded to just the feeling of the globe, the feeling of a nation, the outrage of a nation, and rightfully so, by hosting an equity and anti-racism in education class. And so we've had so far 70 participants this summer. We've been asked to do several other legs of it, and we've created a forum, much like this, Kimberly, where educators can come and talk about their personal journey with equity and anti-racism. We've also had a leg where we said, okay, now how does this impact your classroom? How does this impact the children that you teach and that you instruct? And one of the things that became very clear and abundantly clear is the work of making sure that we are telling the whole picture of American history. I once heard from a colleague in Chicago Public Schools that said that she was teaching students, Black students, she's a Black woman teaching Black students, and the student said, one particular student said, you know, I didn't know that there were slaves that fought back. And she said it broke her heart, right? And she knew then that she had to commit to teaching true American history. And so those are things that we are looking at, right? This work happens in stages, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to do so far. I also want to share this, this work is also deeply embedded in, again, this is a well-studied experience, right? Racism, anti-racism. And what has really given light to this work is works like by Derek Bell that include critical race theory. When you break it down for education by Gloria Gadsden-Billing, where she really talks about instruction, curriculum, making sure that you have culturally responsive, a culturally responsive education experience for all children, so that all children really do benefit from knowing Black history, from knowing Native Alaskan history, from knowing Pacific Islander history, so that they really understand their context in the world in the context of their friends and neighbors. I also want to share that our students are K through 12 education, or primary and secondary education, is about preparing global citizens, right? And in order to prepare global citizens, we have to tell the whole story. We're fortunate to have a superintendent, Dr. Dina Bishop, that equity is on the forefront of her mind. We are fortunate to have an amazing Anchorage School District board that equity is also on their mind. I believe that I saw a board member present in the group Zoom tonight. And so in that, we want to make sure that, again, that we're preparing them for a global citizenship and being able to tell them the whole story. Other movements that we're making is that I just got off a call a little earlier, actually right before this Zoom, where we had our first meeting with Equal Opportunity Schools, an organization that's helping to work with us on AP equity, that's advanced placement equity, to make sure that children at East and at Bartlett have the same opportunities for advanced placement, which we know is a pipeline on the way to post-secondary success. And so we're starting out with East, Bartlett, South, and Service to make sure that our children have access and opportunity across the board. So that's some of the great work that we're doing. I know I said a mouthful.
No, Sonia, that's great. I'm just listening, and they're so lucky to have you at ASD. And I mean, our last conversation, Margot Bellamy joined us as well, and she was very enlightening with her comments. So I thank you for sharing. If anyone has any additional questions for Sonia, if you want to type those in the chat bar. We want to keep moving along to stay on our schedule. But Sonia, I had a question, and that is, how do we activate ourselves to be agents of change on a statewide level in our schools? We know education and advocating for the proper teachings of history matters, but how do we do that? What do you suggest is the best way?
So at the beginning, I talked about those pre-filings and following bills and supporting those persons that are sponsoring those bills to make sure that they're in the best interest of all of our children. I think by engaging in dialogue like this would be a great opportunity and to go statewide, right? To create audiences and engage them on the work of equity in education, to also, you know, be mom in chief, right? Many of you are mothers, and making sure that your children have diverse resources so that they can see themselves and they can see their friends reflected in the resources that are available in the home.
Excellent. We have a quick question. From Kelly, is there a way to get an overview of what purchase curriculum ASD currently uses to teach U.S. history?
There is a way, and I can give a contact in the chat box. I can
Perfect.
give you a contact in the chat box.
Wonderful. Okay, so look out for that. Sonia will post that in the chat. Sonia, thank you for all the work that you're doing at ASD. I see some people clapping. Again, there are great comments there. Yeah, in the chat bar. Please use that if you have a question or comment and you want to press that hand raise function. If that's easier for you, please do that. So,
and then going out, if I could just make one last comment.
Yes.
So I don't work alone. I just want to say that this cannot be done without amazing support, first from the superintendent and from colleagues across the district, and for the people that came and built the infrastructure for which I can launch this work. So I just want to say kudos to all of those people. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Sonia Hunt. Okay, and so now we are moving along to our next guest speaker, Meg Zolotel. She's a member of the Anchorage Assembly representing District 4, Seat F in Alaska. And Meg is here to provide us with an update on Alaska's CARES Act package of over $100 million. She's here to talk about how that will roll out and hopefully make our communities more equitable. And so we want to, yeah. I'm seeing some enthusiasm already. We want to welcome Meg to the conversation. Meg, if you want to unmute your mic.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So the CARES Act conversation, I thought I would start first with the framework we use. So the Assembly met for a couple of all-day facilitated conversations after an initial meeting. We wanted to make sure we were extremely thoughtful with the CARES Act funds, but also recognizing the urgency to put this money into the economy to mitigate the effects of COVID-19. And so we came up with quite a few priority areas and then grouped those into the areas of economic stimulus, family support, housing and homelessness, public health and safety, community investments, direct municipal response, and a contingency fund. We wanted to plan a little bit for in the future so that if a second wave came, or once we have the landscape of school, or when the federal unemployment ended, we can still be responsive to the needs of the community. And then we looked at goals in terms of short-term, or looked at various options in terms of short-term and long-term or transformative. And then we used guiding principles, 6 of them. The need, so aid to populations that need it most, that was desperately impacted by COVID-19. Geography, we wanted to ensure that we were having an impact across the municipality. Alignment, how can we leverage other opportunities and address resource gaps? That's been particularly poignant with the alcohol tax conversation going on. Feasibility, the financial resources and timing needed for implementation. Whether or not we were making informed decisions, we wanted to base our decisions on data, public input, and finally, equity. We wanted to address current and historical inequities in our systems that were illuminated by COVID-19. So last Tuesday, we did a rather large designation of funds. Pretty much most of the funds, with the exception of the contingency fund, which is at $14.9 million. And really what had been weighing on our mind were a couple of key things. One is housing. We have not seen an eviction tsunami, but we keep hearing that that's a real possibility. So we have appropriated $20 million to mortgage and rental assistance. The cost to the economy if someone loses their home is $8,000, and that's only if that's if they're evicted and they bounce right back into housing. So that's a significant impact. And then in addition to that, because we won't necessarily catch everyone with rental and mortgage assistance, we also appropriated $1 million for rapid rehousing funds. So if someone does fall into homelessness, and we can bounce them back out of that system as quickly as possible. And then to kind of complete that loop, we also appropriated $500,000 to risk pool insurance. And this is to keep landlords putting their apartments on the market and housing people who are coming out of homelessness, whether that's they've been, just dropped into homelessness for a moment, or they have had to spend some time in shelter. Because if we don't have enough housing units on the market that we can access to rehouse people, we then wind up with an overpopulation, or we strain the capacity of our mass shelter, which has already been at a capacity a couple of times. Additionally, we have been really working on the childcare issue. We believe that is another key issue facing the community. It's a big issue. It is such a big issue that the municipality alone cannot solve. We realized that very early on. We put $10 million towards licensed facilities. We found a small gap in that for pre-K. And so we funded that. And then actually, thanks to the brain trust of Ms. Moira Smith, appropriated $5 million towards basically like a voucher almost, so that you could use it quite flexibly. And that was for folks who are up to 200% of the poverty line. That's what we love. We love the community's feedback and saying, oh, hey, we're seeing this, or we're seeing this gap, this problem that nothing you're talking about is going to fill. And the idea is coming to us. We also did a few things that I think are really important. One was to help ASC close its pre-K funding gap of $250,000. We, of course, wanted to ensure the capacity of the health department and the library. They both had COVID-related expenses. We are funding mental health clinicians at ASD at $1 million. That'll bring 12 master's level clinicians onto the schools to help our students who, as we know, are affected by COVID. And then we also have, I'm just trying to run through some of these. We had quite a few public lands jobs programs, and this will be our second round. But in addition to that, those are generally physical labor jobs. We also are working with 9-Star in their Net to Ladder program, which really helps folks get retrained and back into the job, back into a job as quickly as possible. And so what we wanted to do is not just focus on folks who could, go out and do a physical labor job, but if you needed a different type of job or you wanted to get training, that was another opportunity. The Mayor's Task Force recommended a voucher program for groceries, gas. So we are doing that in a pilot to see what the demand looks like and how that rolls out. We also have some money for Awake domestic violence prevention. We have seen the numbers and the data show us that there's a bigger need right now for domestic violence assistance. And then another one was mental health first responders. I think this is very timely. We have seen the conversation around police shift dramatically, and the recognition that police have been asked to do work that isn't police work, that could be better suited to a clinician. And so this would be the money to get up and running. Mental health first responders, a 24/7 basically van, couple of people trained to go out and respond to these 200 to 300 calls a month that APD gets. So hopefully what we can do is to provide a more suitable response and get better outcomes, better referrals, better follow-up. So I'm really excited about that. And then we also wanted to preserve some of the things that make Anchorage and Alaska the place that it is. So the cultural pillars funding, we heard from the zoo, the conservation center, the museum, and others that without some assistance, they may not make it. And that's not something we really want to run the risk of. We want these available to have a vibrant community after COVID. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. The main hope is that money will roll out as quickly as possible, but it does take a little while. We did fund some things that are already in progress, and we have tried to scale where possible so that we weren't having to reinvent new programs. And the jobs programs are generally done through the union halls, and that is because of equity. They have federal reporting requirements, and they have women hire, re-entry hire, and people of color hire obligations, and they track that data for us. And so far it has shown that it's working. So we look forward to continuing our partnership with them.
Great. Thank you so much, Meg. And, you know, for those of you who are joining us midway through the conversation, as we promised we would tonight, we're talking about systemic racism and inequity, and we're talking about our action items, moving from anger to action. Our first conversation was really intense. It was really emotionally raw, but we wanted to move on from that place and talk about what's happening in our communities and what is our role in making sure that our communities are more equitable. And a lot of that has to do with the checks. And so we're learning about where this money is getting distributed if we want to have a say, and learn more about where this money is getting distributed, or if we have ideas on that. Meg, is there a way that we can get involved if we want to support any of these initiatives before we move along to our next guest?
Sure. So I put the web page that we created for our CARES Act for the assembly on in the chat, and they'll be uploading a lot of information in the next couple of days. And our contact information is there, as well as I believe there's like a JOT form so you can fill it out and provide feedback for us.
Well, thank you for all of the work that you're doing in our communities and in our state, Meg. I'm so glad you could be on this call. And I wanted to move it down. Yeah, wanted to move it down to our final guest for tonight. And this is good because we may have a couple minutes for Q&A at the end. Our final guest is Senator L.B. Gray Jackson. As an Anchorage Assembly member, Senator Gray Jackson was key in passing the ordinance to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day an official municipality holiday. As a state senator, she was behind legislation making Black History Month and Native Heritage Month across the state. She also pre-filed several bills to recognize Women's History Month, which we love, thank you, LGBT Pride Month, which we love, Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, that's a tongue twister, Hispanic Heritage Month, and Filipino American History Month. I think I got them all. But I can think a few lawmakers working at this level to make our state more equitable. And we are grateful to welcome Senator Gray Jackson, who will share what she's working on now and how we can be of support. Senator, just unmute yourself there.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's an honor to be here, and I'm sorry I couldn't be here from the beginning, and I'm going to have to leave shortly after. But anyway, you said a lot of what I've done at the state level, but I just want to also mention that when I was on the Anchorage Assembly, it was really, really important to me to recognize the different cultures within our community. And, you know, for example, Filipino month. And it was so wonderful to do that because they, you know, they'd come to the assembly meeting and the resolution would be read and everybody would clap. And our community realized that, you know, that they really, really mattered. So that's where I started. But when I went to Juneau, I decided, you know, I'm not going to do any more resolutions for cultural months. I want them to be a bell. I want them to be in state statutes permanently because more than anything else, it's symbolic. And as you mentioned, I was really, truly honored to be successful in getting Black History Month passed with some help from Representative Story from the House side, and then Alaska Native History Month passed, my first session, with some help from Representative Zukowski from the House. And it was truly an honor to have these bills passed. And I got to tell you, I really have to thank the Senate President, because she could have really held things up and she didn't. And for that, I'm truly, truly grateful. And I think everybody must know or by now that Juneteenth, that's going to be one of my priorities, to make Juneteenth a state paid holiday, just like the 4th of July. And I'm looking forward to bringing up, actually pre-filing that come December. In addition to that, I'm working on a package of police reform bills. Tom Begich has already signed on. Hopefully I can get our entire minority caucus to sign on. And it's called TPIP, which stands for turning pain into progress. And it's a series of 8 bills. And as I do with anything that I introduce, before I introduce anything, even when I was on the assembly, I always bring the stakeholders to the table to iron things out, to get feedback, so that by the time it gets to, I introduce it, you know, things have been worked out and things won't be held up. And I did that when I was on the assembly. I'm proud of that effort, but that's what I plan to do. But also, one of the things that I want to say is, you know, a lot of us are sad, you know, and experience some anger to a certain extent. But I really appreciate what you said earlier in terms of anger, because there are 3 words, and I have a T-shirt. Somebody made it for me, and I'd like to get a whole bunch more T-shirts and distribute them, okay? Because and the 3 words are anger inhibits progress. And it really, really does. If we want to get things done, we can be angry, but move on from being angry, because anger inhibits progress. And we want to see progress at this point. There's a lot of conversations. I'm at a lot of meetings and Zoom meetings, of course, now, and there's tons of conversation being held, but it's time for progress. And anger inhibits that progress. With that said, if there's any questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer them. Thank you.
Sure, I see some comments in the chat bar, one from Mary that says, "This Filipino-American woman appreciates your work, Senator Gray Jackson. Thank you for officially recognizing and valuing our community and our contributions."
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions, you are welcome to ask those now. We have a couple of minutes, and I would like to just give you some additional information about the cohort from Alaska Humanities Forum and give us a chance to ask a couple questions of each other. I did have a question, Senator Gray Jackson. We've been talking a lot about monuments on a national level and on a local level. In hearing about monuments that are controversial and that are causing some people pain. And I wanted to ask you, because what I've learned about those monuments is they're very hard to remove and or rename. Is that true? Is that the case? Or is that even something that you feel that people should be focused on?
I think that what we should focus, let me back up a minute. I'm not sure how hard they are to remove, but a lot of them are made of brass, and maybe it is hard, I don't know. But I think what we should focus on more than anything else is change and making a difference and bringing forward at the local level and state level legislation that will make change. That's what we need to be focusing on right now.
Yes, thank you. And with that, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, you are welcome to either press the hand raise function or to put those in the chat bar. And while we are waiting for any of that, any comments to present themselves, Senator Gray Jackson, I just wanted to ask you how we can support you, how we can best support the work that you're doing. What's our action item?
What you need to do is sign up on basis where you'll get emails that tell you the progress of bills, and it's pretty easy to do, and a lot of you may already be familiar, so that you know when my bills are going to committee. And it would be just wonderful if you could testify, because that's really, really important testimony. And as everybody knows, you know, at the state level, all our work is done in committee, and that's where we have public hearings. So sign up for basis so you can keep track of all my bills. And I have quite a few. And somebody criticized me for having too many bills. I'm like, really? You know, but anyway, sign up for basis so that you'll know when my bills are being heard in committee. And I'm hopeful that maybe things will change and things will move along a little bit faster than they did during this session, because I'm going to have to introduce everything that's been out there. And that's okay, because everything is ready to go. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you to Representative Guarantar. She had posted some excellent resources there in the chat bar if you want to look at those. She said, here's a link for email alerts. Use this for all bills being heard by the legislature. So thank you, Garen, for that information. And thank you, Senator Gray Jackson. This is a real pleasure for us. A quick question I see before we move along. There was a question: what intentional steps are being taken to create more representation of women and people of color in our Alaska state politics? If anyone wants to take that. I know that there are more women and people of color running in this upcoming national election than there ever has been in the history of our nation, but not so sure about the state level. Can anyone speak to that? Senator, did you, or Garen, do either of you want to take that one?
Well, I could just make a really quick comment, okay? For me, it's really, really important to have diversity in my office, and we're in the minority, so I only get 2 staffers for right now, and anyway, things can change. And I had a Black man, and I also had a gay man as staff. I still have a gay man as staff, but Jacob moved on. He's going to be a teacher in the ASD school system. But my goal was to find a qualified, of course, minority, a person of color, to take his place, and I've been successful in doing that. And she also has some legislative experience, which is really, really important. I mean, I want to hire a minority, but I need, somebody who can do the job that I need. And I'm really thrilled to say I was able to do that. She doesn't start until the session starts. And, this is leeway in my mind for a future potential candidate to run for office. And that's what I've done at my level, and I'll continue to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, for sharing what you have done. Thank you. And we have some more resources there posted in the chat bar. So I am happy to say that I think we were able to get this done in our allotted time, which never happens. So I'm pretty self-pleased. Yes. But before I wrap up, because we are scheduled to wrap up at 6 o'clock, I want to give Lori Wolf the quick platform. I want to put Lori on the spot to share a little bit about this incredible data. And this is around women. So we're going to veer off a little bit, because Women's Power League, we are a women's organization. And so this is like mind-blowing stuff for us. And while I have all these incredible women on this call, I just want Lori Wolf to share some information about some. Lori, just go.
Okay, you're hilarious. Can you, if you want to put up the link, that would be great. So I'll just, and a shout out to Representative Tar on this call. 4Acre has been devoted to ending the gender pay gap, along with many others across our state. And part of ending the gender pay gap is actually to understand what the pay gap is. And Representative Tar and love and wonderful people at the Department of Labor, Corrine Weibold in particular, have been hot on the effort to understand the pay gap across the state, but we have been on a specific effort to understand the pay gap across the nonprofit sector in Alaska. And we just released, just last week, a monumental study, first of its kind in the country, to really understand the pay gap for women in our sector. So shout out to the Women's Power League for their support, and Alaska USA Credit Union and GCI for underwriting our efforts. We worked in strong partnership with the Center for Economic Development, and we just are super excited to share with you this data. It's super sad, horrible, awful, no good, bad data, and it's what we need to take action. So we can't change something if we don't understand how broken it truly is. So now we really understand how broken it truly is. Just really want to encourage you all to check out we have this, Gretchen Fasky at the Center for Economic Development made an awesome video that just gives you this quick and short version, but you can download the full thing. And importantly to this effort, it wasn't just to know the data, we actually have concrete action steps you can take, including some really important generative conversations to spur conversation in your own team. So happy to talk more about that. But on August 25th, we're having a free webinar about it. And I just encourage you all to jump on that call and learn more about the data. And again, shout out to Representative Tarr, who's introduced legislation, much like in the state of Washington, where it would be illegal to ask women what they have made in previous jobs, because that is one of the things that perpetuates the pay gap. So hopefully we'll see that legislation pop back up with a Republican sign on as well. And anyway, more to come. So August 25th, come to 4-Acre. We'll tell you lots more.
Beautiful. And I have posted more information on that. Yeah, I know. I'm seeing claps and all these great comments in the chat bar. I agree. It's a pretty big deal. And because of the permanent fund, we haven't had the upswing on gathering that data. So it's pretty incredible. Hard to read, but we need to read it. I don't even want to say as women, we need to read it. Everyone needs to see this data. So I have posted that in the link there if you want to learn more. And I agree with the comment in the chat bar. This is huge, and we are grateful to the work that Lori and so many others have been doing. Gretchen Fauske, who's a friend of this group, GCI, and many others. So on that note, I think that we are ready to conclude this conversation. If you do have any questions before we end, if you want to paste that in the chat bar. I want to also thank you to the Alaska Humanities Forum. Don't forget that they are sponsoring conversations across generations for those who want to dig deeper into race, into those conversations, and they have done so in partnership with Women's Power League of Alaska, and we're so grateful that they committed to this. 3 2.5-month long cohort journeys. Contact Meg. I put her email there in the chat bar. I can put it in again before we wrap up. So thank you so much, Megan of the Alaska Humanities Forum. Thank you to Lori Wolf, President and CEO of the 4-Acre Group. Thank you to Lindy Kelleher and Radhika Krishna with the Anchorage Community Land Trust. Thank you to Tiffany Hall, and that little sweet one that joined us for this conversation, Executive Director of Recover Alaska. Thank you to Sonia Hunt, Senior Director of Office of Equity and Compliance with the Anchorage School District. Thank you to Meg Zolotel, Anchorage Assembly Member. Thank you to Senator Elvie Gray Jackson, and also thank you to our sponsors, Alaska Humanities Forum, the 4-Acre Group, YWCA Alaska, and GCI. For more information about Women's Power League of Alaska, we are active on our socials, but mostly active on Facebook. So to learn about what we do, you can log on to WPLAK.com. If you like anything that you heard tonight, or if you want to align yourselves with our organization, please join our mailing list. That's at WPLAK.com. You can also donate if you're so inclined to do so. Part 3 of Courageous Conversations About Race will happen in September, and we will continue on examining and talking about race from a national lens in that conversation. So look out for the follow-up. But thank you to all who tuned on tonight. And with that, I think we are prepared to sign off.
Thank you, Kim. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.